I'll give you a talk now, a eulogy for Internet Explorer. Let's give it up for Niels.
In 6 days, Windows 10 will be released. And for the first time since Windows 95, Internet Explorer will not be the default browser in Windows. And that place has been taken by Microsoft Edge. And so now it would be a good time to say goodbye. A eulogy, if you will. I know Internet Explorer has a bad reputation, and deservedly so. But I'm going to say one thing right off the bat that may surprise you. Internet Explorer was a good browser. There, I said it. And no, I'm not suffering from Stockholm syndrome. I sincerely mean it. I'm willing to go even further. Internet Explorer 6 was a good browser. Well, in 2001. If I look back with our current mindset, we may think EA6 was flawed, even facepalm worthy, or worse. Some may hate it with the fury of 1,000 suns. But compared to its contemporaries, well, there were others that were batshit insane. Yes, I mean Netscape. And yes, I've always wanted to use these effects. The best viewed with badge was worn with pride. Looking back now, we may think these developers were lazy. But that was not the reason. It was fighting the insanity of Netscape Navigator. It was cutting the mustard. Netscape didn't allow us to create what we wanted, and Internet Explorer was pretty much the only sane browser there was. And then Microsoft did nothing for 5 years. They totally dismantled the team, and no development took place. And in 2006, Internet Explorer 6 was just not a good browser anymore. It was quickly caught up by other browsers, and even its replacement, Internet Explorer 7, was not good enough. And they actually spent the last 9 years trying to make up for that. And only just now with Edge, Microsoft can tentatively say it has caught up. Well, at least playing in the same ballpark. And remember, this is all before the big push for standard support. In fact, many standards we now have were already possible, one way or another in Internet Explorer. Sure, in many cases they were not standards-based, but that was because at the time there simply were no standards for those features. They were the first. So let's look at some examples. Opacity. Internet Explorer 4 had a legacy implementation of making elements translucent using their filters, CSS filters. The standardized opacity property was appeared in the first draft in the CSS3 colors module in 2001. So there's 4 years between first implementation in Internet Explorer and standards. And actually first unprefixed standards implementation was in 2004. That's 7 years. And in fact, most CSS3 visual effects started out as an Internet Explorer filter. We have box shadow, gradients, blur, and even 2D transforms were all possible in Internet Explorer 4. Another example. Sometimes it wasn't Microsoft's fault. EA was actually the first browser to support web fonts natively. Add font face was actually part of CSS2, was dropped from 2.1 and later spun out to CSS3 module. And EA already supported it in Internet Explorer 4. And other browsers were doomed to use technologies like the scalable Inman flash replacements, which sounds horrible, and it was horrible. And well, at least they had to use it until 12 years later, when Firefox finally also supported at font effects. 12 years. And in other occasions there were competing standards, and Microsoft simply backed the wrong one. VML was a resolution-independent graphics language based in XML. That may sound familiar. If you know SVG, it's basically the same thing, but different drawing model. But VML was actually proposed to the W3C in 1998, and it was first implemented in Internet Explorer 5. The work on SVG in the working group started after the first implementation in Internet Explorer of VML. So it's not that Microsoft didn't support the standards, they were just too soon. And actually, VML was so powerful that Google used it to create a polyfill for the canvas element. So Microsoft did actually do something right here. It just didn't get picked up. And Internet Explorer even supported animations and transitions without scripting, by using Smile and integrating it with HTML. They submitted it to the W3C as HTML plus time, and in 1998, but it never went anywhere. But they were on the right track, because Smile is still used in combination with SVG for animations. And it took Apple 8 years to come up with their CSS3 based transitions and animations. HTML components. Well, the web tends to reinvent itself. The idea of web components are not new. Internet Explorer already had a way to extend HTML elements with their own behavior. It was called HTML components, and was just another example of a technology that went nowhere. We seem to criticize Microsoft for using a lot of proprietary technology. But just like VML and HTML plus time, HTML components were actually submitted as a spec to W3C. And sometimes Microsoft did get it right, or at least right enough to get other browsers to copy their proprietary implementation. And that led to the need to reverse engineer the existing behavior and create a specification based on that. And Content Editable was already supported in 1999 in Internet Explorer 5. And just last year it was standardized. My last example is a special case. Because while Internet Explorer was the first to support XML HTTP requests, it didn't have a native implementation. It was actually an ActiveX component that called the XML HTTP system component that shipped with Windows. But it was very useful and enabled the whole Ajax revolution. So other browsers quickly reverse engineered it and supported it natively using the new XML HTTP request object. We quickly forget where we came from. And it's easy to get wrapped up in the IE is bad and IE must die sentiment. But a lot of what now is possible on the web was pioneered by Internet Explorer. It was the first sane browser that somewhat supported standards. And we forget that Microsoft was actually very active with standardization. But they screwed it up. Then they screwed it up themselves by letting Internet Explorer 6 live far longer than it deserved. By doing nothing for 5 years, they turned a brilliant browser into the bane of every web developer's existence. And just for that, Internet Explorer deserved to die. With that being said, there's just one thing left for me to say. That's goodbye, old friends.